This video is about the lenses I use for my outdoor photography. To my surprise, when I brought them all together, I discovered that I've got 10 lenses which have been collected over a period of 15 years since I got my first mirrorless camera. They're all APS-C lenses because my camera is a Sony APS-C. As you'll see, there's a huge range of focal lengths and apertures. Some of these are what are called fast lenses, some of them aren't. All of them are adequate for my purposes, which does mean publication in magazines and books. I think at least one photo from every one of these lenses has appeared. Now, there are only 9 lenses in front of me, and that's because one of them over there is actually making the video and is on the camera, and that is the smallest, lightest lens I have, which is the Sony 16-50 f3.5 to f5.6 zoom lens, which is tiny and weighs just 127 grams. It's the lens that comes with many cameras as the kit lens. Mine came with the Sony a6000, so it's quite old. In fact, it's the second oldest lens that I've got. For 5 or 6 years, it was my main lens, and the quality is perfectly fine, especially if you take photos around f8. It's not got a good reputation. I think that's partly because it's a kit lens. It is relatively slow. It's not one for low light, but it is light and compact, and as I say, the results are fine. I hadn't used it as much in recent years because of some other lenses which I'm going to talk about, but the last couple of years it has come out again as a video lens because it is really good for video. One of the main reasons being that it's got a power zoom, which means that I can use the zoom without having to touch the camera. So as now I want to zoom in so I can show you the lenses in more detail, I don't have to get up and go round to the camera and alter the zoom setting. I can simply do it from here, like that, which is extremely useful for this sort of video. Now, the first lens is one, this effectively replaced the 16-50 as my most used lens, and it's the Sony 18-135. Again, it's f3.5 to f5.6, so it's not a fast lens. It has a variable aperture. It extends when it zooms, but as you can see, it's still very compact. And the reason I changed this lens is because of the reach. 18 is still wide angle, not as wide as 16, but there's not a lot in it. But 135 is enormous compared with 50. And for those who think in full frame terms, of course, you have to multiply this by 1.5 to get the full frame equivalent. So this lens is roughly 28-200 in full frame terms. The 16-50 is 24-75. So as you can see, the difference in the reach is enormous. And although this lens weighs quite a bit more, in fact it weighs 360 grams than the 127 grams of the 16-50, but I used to carry, which I'll get to, a telephoto zoom with the 16-50 for the extra reach. Usually when I'm taking this lens I don't, so overall it saves weight, but this is certainly my most used lens by far. Like the 16-50 and most of my lenses, it has got stabilization inside, so you can hand hold it at lower shutter speeds. Now all the early Sony APS-C cameras did not have in-body stabilization, The latest ones, like my A6-700, do, which means it's not so essential to have it in the lens, though the two together seem to be even more effective than either one separately. But with a camera like the A6000, it's really useful to have stabilized lenses. The lens has got one control on the side, which is this AF/MF switch. Now this is really useful, not that I often use manual focus, very occasionally I do, but more if I want to check how much of a scene is really in focus, I can switch to manual focus, use the peaking color to show what's in focus, and check that everything I want is in focus before I take the shot. So having that on the lens, rather than having to, go into the menus and adjust things on the camera body, really makes a difference. So it's a feature I really like. Anyway, as I say, this is my most used lens. If I only take one lens, this is the one I take. However, usually I take at least two. And the other lens I take is a wide angle zoom. This is the Sony 10-20 f4, so not very fast, but a fixed aperture. The zooming is internal, so it doesn't change length. It's very light, weighs 206 grams. It's got the same AF/MF switch as the 18-135, but it's also got a power zoom control like the 16-50, which again for videos is really useful. This is a lens that I often use when I'm making videos of camps and campsites, because it's got a wide enough range I can get everything in, and if I want to zoom in on something a bit closer, I can use the power zoom to do so. At 10-20, the 10 end is a lot wider than the 16 on the 16-50. It's also got a customizable button on the side. Now I must admit, I've never done anything with that. I might work out that it could be useful for something one day, but I never have. But anyway, this is the second lens that I take with me. If I'm going on an overnight trip, I often take a third lens, which is fixed focal length. This is the Sony 11mm f1.8, also a very light lens, it's 219 grams. Now obviously the focal length is in the 10-20. In fact, 10-20 is slightly wider than this at its widest end. But the reason I've got this is the f1.8, because if I want to take low light shots, sometimes recording myself in the tent at night, or in particular night shots of the sky, then this is really useful because of that fast aperture. It's a very high quality lens as well. It's got the AF/MF switch, it's got that customizable button. So this is the third lens that I carry regularly. However, a couple of years ago, I got an alternative to the 18-135, and that's this Sigma 18-50. It's the only non-Sony lens I have. It's not stabilized, but it works fine with the A6700, which, as I say, is. And the reason I got this lens is it is f2.8, so it is a faster lens than the 18-135 or the 16-50, and it's a fixed aperture, so it's f2.8 whatever focal length you zoom into, which is really useful. And again, it's much better for low light than the other two lenses. So I've been using this a bit more. Of course, the disadvantage it has is, again, it only zooms to 50mm, so it doesn't have the reach of the 18-135. It's only 18 at the wide angle lens, whereas the kit lens is 16. But as I've got the 10 to 20 zoom, that's not a problem. But I do miss, when I use it, having that extra reach. Now, I found a couple of other advantages for this. Of course, it's easy to separate a subject from a background. So if you're taking portraits or I'm taking a picture of an object and I don't want a cluttered background, the f2.8 means I can do that. And also I was surprised to discover it actually works as almost a macro lens. You can focus really closely with this, and that's two things it's much harder to do with the 18 to 135. All in all, this is a very useful lens, and in recent years, as I say, I've been using it a bit more, which also means that I am using my oldest lens a bit more, which is this Sony 55 to 210, because this has got the reach that the Sigma hasn't got. And in fact, it's got quite a bit longer reach than the 18 to 135. Now, I got this lens with my first NEX camera. So it's, it's very old and it's well used because it was the one I always carried with the 1650 for the longer reach. It is quite long when it zooms out. You can see it's quite big, but it's not that bulky, and at 391 grams it's really quite light. Oh, the Sigma, I don't think I mentioned, the Sigma is 328 grams, but it does mean that if I carry this and the Sigma, it's about twice the weight in lenses of the 18 to 135, but obviously more versatile. So certainly on day walks and overnight trips, this lens has been coming along. It's a slow lens, and it's f4.5 to f6.3, so it's really not a lens for low light. However, when the light's good enough, being able to zoom in so much can be really useful. I wouldn't take this and the Sigma now on a multi-night walk. I'd go back to the 18 to 135 to save the weight. But on day trips and overnight trips, I've gone back to carrying this again. Like the original 1650 kit lens, it doesn't have a good reputation, but I found that as long as you stick to f8, it takes perfectly good shots. The raw files are a bit flat, need a bit of work in Lightroom or DxO Photo Plus, but they're, as I say, they're perfectly fine. However, when I decided I wanted even more reach and I wanted possibly better quality images, I bought this, which in my terms is a monster. This is the Sony 75 to 350 mm lens, f4.5 to f6.3, same as the 55 to 210, so still not a fast lens, so not good in low light, but the zoom length is equivalent to over 500 mm in full frame terms. The penalty for that is the weight, and as you can see, the bulk. I mean, it weighs 727 grams, so my heaviest lens by far. I mean, the next heaviest after that is the 55-210 at 391. That's a considerable difference. And also, and I have to back up even to show you this, it has a lock, so it won't droop when you zoom it, but it does extend, and as you can see, extended, it's quite a big lens, and it does feel a bit top heavy on the smaller cameras, even the A6700, which is a bit bigger than the A6000. It takes superb quality pictures, and obviously I can zoom in a lot more than with any other. Even so, I have not used it as much as I thought I would because of the weight and bulk, and I really ought to use it more. But so often I think, do I really want to carry this? Will I actually use it much? Probably not. So I take the 55-210. And I think that is the point, that it doesn't matter how good your lenses are. If the weight and bulk means you leave them at home, well, they're no good at all because they're not taking any pictures. So this is an excellent lens that I ought to use more, but probably won't. We then come to, again, an old lens. This is my third oldest lens, and it's the Sigma 30mm f3.5 macro lens. And when I originally got this, I thought I might do some macro photography. I didn't do much in the end, and the lens sat in a case in the cupboard and didn't get used for quite a few years. The last couple of years, though, it's come out again. Not for outdoor macro shots, but for photographing some of my old transparencies on a light box for publication. In fact, last year I took hundreds of pictures like that for this, and they were for the republication of this book, which is High Summer, which is the book of my Canadian Rockies walk from 1988. And I needed lots of photos that had never been scanned before because it has far more photos than the original edition did. And all the images in this, black and white other than the cover in the paperback, and colour in the ebook, were all slides photographed with this little lens. So given that a couple of times recently, well, 3 or 4 years ago, I thought, do I need to keep this lens? Probably not. I'm now glad I did. But we now come to two lenses that I really probably won't keep much longer. The 30mm is very light, 163 grams. This is the only full frame lens I've got, which is the FE 50mm f1.8, which I got so that I had a fast lens in, a portrait style focal length. This is equivalent to 75mm in full frame. I've used it very occasionally, but not actually that much, and I don't think I've ever taken it on any walks other than local ones. So now that I've got the Sigma, which although it's f2.8 seems to be good enough for the same shots that this takes, I probably don't need this at all. And I also probably don't need this one, which in fact is an old lens that hasn't had anything like the use that justifies keeping it. And this is the Sony 35mm f1.8, which, a nifty 50 in full frame terms, 52mm. And again, I got it for the f1.8 so that I had a fast standard prime lens. But again, I've not used it very much, and I think the Sigma effectively replaces it. So these two lenses will probably go. Anyway, that's a look through my lens range. Let's bring myself back into the picture, and there's all the lenses, why I have them and use them, and the two that are probably going to go, the one that I'm reluctant to part with, so therefore ought to use more, and the 3 that I use regularly, and 2 that I use occasionally and have started to use a bit more. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you enjoyed the video, as always, please subscribe, and at some point I'll do other photographic videos on maybe the gear I use for making the videos, tripods and so on, and the items I use to carry all of these, which is the camera bags. But for now, that's my lenses review.